Good afternoon, everyone. Y'all can respond, it's okay. It looks like we're gonna have a dynamic conversation. So I'm gonna start again. Hi, everyone. Y'all could say hey. Okay, perfect. Glad to have you all here. I am Patricia Césaire. I lead the inclusion, diversity, and equity customer engagement efforts here globally at AWS. That essentially means how we go to market, partner, and collaborate with customers and our partners around their inclusion, diversity, and equity goals, their vision, their mission, and our collective focus. And that can be anything from community engagement to social impact to thought leadership, which is why we're here today. And so excited to introduce you to our star panelists today who are going to speak about their work across their organization with a customer and sharing insights around success stories specific to leveraging AWS services, and of course, more on their own strategy internally, what they do to make their customers not only understand the value of the work that they do, but solve for them. And so without further ado, I will introduce you to, just make sure our slides are working, Will Lash. Feel free to introduce yourself, Will.
All right, hello everyone. My name is William Lash. I'm a graduate of the North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, better known as A&T. Also have a master's in systems engineering from George Mason University. I'm a member of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. I've ascertained several certifications, pretty much alphabet soup, Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, PMI, PMP, TBM, so on and so forth. I've graduated from the Goldman Sachs 10K Small Business Program. In addition, actually next week I'll be going to Harvard University in the Emerging Leaders Program. So I have 2 days to go home, pack up, and do this all over again. So I'm really excited about that. In addition to that, as a CEO, my focus is really laying out the strategic vision of the company, helping out with the culture, the values, and how we achieve those business long-term goals. With that being said, and I talk about culture, one of my biggest focuses is ensuring that I actually don't call anyone employees. We use team members, because regardless of what your role is, what your title is, you still have to be able to just step in and make sure we get the job done. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Jide.
Thank you, William. First of all, it's such a pleasure being here today. My name is Jide Awe. I am the Director of Technology at Chirality Capital Consulting. A little bit about myself. Similar to William, actually where we met, I also attended North Carolina A&T University. I am a computer scientist. Started off as a developer. Didn't like it this much. I transitioned into being a business analyst, gathering requirements for software development projects. Then I kind of worked my way up to being a project manager, program manager, and now an executive at a small business consulting firm. So through that time, I have about 20 years of experience. Through my journey, I've been able to obtain an MBA from Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. Similar to William, alphabet soup here, PMP certified, and also AWS certified. I'm a solution architect professional. I've worked in both private and public sectors, doing enterprise implementations, as of late, a lot of business transformation and digitalization. And getting into my role at Chirality as director, I'm focused on laying the foundation for our tech arm, where I focus on identifying the best technology for our staff members, as we call team members, and also our clients. And also my focus as of recent is AWS strategic initiatives, focusing on cloud migrations, scalable data-driven solutions, and data management and governance.
And in addition to all that, you still managed to apparently pull off a very successful double birthday party last week for twins.
Yes, absolutely. So fun fact about me, I have twins. They just turned 9 years old. When they were younger, I was able to get away with doing a party together. Now they have their very distinct personalities. I have a boy and girl, so I have to do two of everything now. So I did one birthday party at American Dream Girls and American Doll, and then laser tag. So it was a fun weekend.
I have another fun fact. So as great as he is, I have 3 children, one 13, one 12, and one 6, all boys. A lot of energy, to say the very least, and it's never a dull second. So although his isn't bad, I have to say mine's a little bit more challenging.
For sure.
Interestingly enough, and apologies, I called, it's William, right, for today's purposes. But interestingly enough, you have some some interesting facts about your name as it relates to your family. You mentioned to me on a call when we were prepping for this session. I just thought it would be noteworthy to share.
No, sure. So my father, he was very confident who he is as a man. His name was Willie Lash. He named my brother Willie, so that's another Will. I named my son William Lash II, just to make things interesting. I have a cousin I just found out, his name is Will Lash. So there are actually 12 William Lashes all throughout the East Coast, funny enough. Not sure it was in the West, but just on the East Coast. So.
Are there any William Lashes here in the conference at AWS this week that we should also be aware of?
I'm looking right now out here.
don't see
Are there any? Okay, I don't believe so.
All right, and I'd love for you to share a little bit more insight before we jump into the success story with one of your core customers, Department of Justice, a little bit more on Chirality consulting, Chirality Capital Consulting. Specifically, your organizational composition. I'm curious about the name, the origin of it, meaning if there is significance there, and a bit more about the customers that you serve.
Got you.
William?
So actually, Jide, do you mind, give a little pop quiz. Do you know what Chirality stands for? Then I'll go about more the overview of who we are.
Okay, I think I could pass this quick exam.
And guys, let me know if you all think he did a good job or not, because I've said this a million times, so I really want to make sure he got this.
Slow nod if you understand after this, okay.
So the term chirality is actually Greek, and it means hand. And the term also references mirror image. So as you can see, our hands are the same, but yet different. At Chirality, we strive to get as intimate with our client, understanding their business, their processes, their culture, to the point that Chirality and our client are almost indistinguishable. Good job.
How do you guys think he did? Okay. All right. It's bonus time, guys, so I need to know if he did a good job. All right. All right, with that being said, so like I said, Chirality Capital Consulting, we've been around for approximately 7 years. We focus on 3 different areas. The initial one being strategy. So we help our clients out with mission, vision, goals, strategic projects, things of that nature. The next one is business transformation. So we do anything from PMO work, project management work, Lean Six, Agile. We even have a couple of DE&I contracts that we're dealing with right now. The last arm is more, I would say, IT. Specifically DevOps, system engineering, and of course data analytics, and that's what we'll talk about more as we go throughout today. We are 8A certified, we have various contract vehicles. We also have facilities clearance. Our different, I would say, clients are mostly Department of Defense, so anywhere from Army, Air Force, Navy, more alphabet soup, DHRA, DMOC, OUSDPNR, that's Office of the Secretary of Defense. In addition to that, we also have Department of Transportation, and of course, Department of Justice.
And so we'd love to hear a little bit more about the customer that we're talking about today, Department of Justice.
Absolutely.
Jide, walk us a little bit through your relationship with the DOJ. We'll use that for the purposes today. This is the acronym.
Yeah.
And what we can better understand about what you were looking to solve for with them.
Sure. So in addition to my hat as being Director of Technology, I also client-face specifically as the program manager for our client, Department of Justice. Some may know, some may not know, but the Department of Justice host or retain federal inmates. So as part of that service, the Department of Justice is governed by federal law to render medical and behavioral health services to all federal inmates. So currently, there are about 150,000 inmates in over 122 institutions across the U.S. Primary care is provided by staffed physicians and advanced practice by medical professionals similar to the hospitals and doctors that we use. This arm of the Department of Justice, their annual budget is roughly about $1.3 billion. And that's a strong data point there because the magnitude of those costs, where it's continuing to grow on a per capita basis, and it has made it a very important consideration for Congress, where they've been reflecting on the continuous cost and increase across the healthcare industry nationwide. And I think that's about it.
Okay, so your customers at the Department of Justice, the DOJ, were challenged with some specific inefficiencies, and it was specific to their data integration and collection processes and systems. Would you walk us through those specific challenges and how they impacted their organization, but also the greater community, specifically the healthcare and patient services arm?
Absolutely. So not unique to DOJ. I'll kind of speak broadly about challenges across many government agencies. They essentially lack decision support infrastructure. Decision support infrastructure being the ability to obtain information efficiently and quickly and act on that information and make decisions for the organization. And that's typically across many government agencies. Agencies are naturally decentralized organizations where a lot of the departments don't really speak to each other as efficiently and as effectively for operational purposes. In addition to that, in referencing data, there's this inability to connect operational, people, and financial data to business outcomes, where it's really the focus is really just getting processes completed, and not really focusing on how it's happening or the impact of some of these results. And then also, referencing moving toward government leaders, they believe the ability to integrate, data and real-time information is one of the main issues that they face, right? And they lack the ability to make these real-time decisions. They also do more with a limited budget, and as we all know, with COVID, this also accelerated and showed, some of the constraints that government agencies have. So I just wanted to kind of lay that foundation there. Now moving on to DOJ and their challenges with data integration and data collection processes. The leadership wanted to know and understand their high-cost centers, right? So executives within DOJ weren't able to confidently articulate why costs were increasing. So I'll start with one use case. So as a result of the increased costs for healthcare services, Congress requested that the DOJ provide data and information on why these costs were rising. Don't laugh at this, but this is reality. A lot of the information that they needed was actually stored in spreadsheets on local machines and on shared drives. You would assume at this rate, this data would be integrated to where they can quickly develop a report. But because this data was so disparate and it lacked integration, it took them maybe 2 to 3 months before they could actually respond to Congress for their request. So that's one use case. Another use case is legacy systems. And legacy systems, they lack the ability to integrate. One of the pain points, for example, was their EHR system that they used to manage the inmate healthcare records. That system lacked integration with what we call the inmate management system, which created silos where you weren't able to see a holistic view of the inmates. So physicians would only see their health information, but they weren't able to kind of get more of the demographic and behavioral information that would help them or enable them to provide a better diagnosis. So, those were some of the challenges there.
That's interesting. And what were some of the, William, I was curious to know if there were specific data points around those deficits in terms of the impact on the inmate patient population and what we should better understand about the conditions that were a part of those deficits around their care based on the gaps with legacy system to actually automating it eventually.
Right. I'm actually going to take it from a different perspective, guys. Like I said, I'm not as knowledgeable as my friend here, or nearly as technical, but I'm more looking at it from the inmate's perspective. A lot of times, you see people being very reactionary. You think about what happened with COVID. One of the things that we've seen is because of them being reactionary, they're not able to actually fully understand how data works across the board or the different challenges that they're actually having. So by them being able to do that, and I'm going to pull up some examples right now, among inmates with persistent medical problems, approximately 14% of federal inmates, 20% of state inmates, and 68% of local jail inmates did not receive the medical examinations while incarcerated. And mind you, that's going from a mental health perspective and medical perspective. And about 2/3 of the prison inmates and less than half of jail inmates who had previously been treated with psychiatric medication were not able to get the right medication needed for their mental conditions. So think about that, guys. I mean, really take time out to think about that those are the individuals who are there, and then think about what they have to go through, what their families have to go through. And if they're fortunate enough to actually re-enter into society, how can we expect them to actually be able to acclimate, a certain way? So although, we're looking at it from a data and system perspective, I'm talking about more for the greater good and the greater community. So we really have to take time out to really fix these issues. One of the things I know we're going to talk about this later, we try to do as a solution is versus being reactionary, we try to tell them, let's stop, refrain, refocus, and then instead of being reactionary, how do we respond? And that's much different. It's much different, as he stated earlier, having spreadsheets everywhere, not even knowing how to capture data correctly across the board. They're just looking at it from that perspective. Our goal and objective is to really make sure that we help our clients understand, once again, let's stop being so reactionary because it's different than just not receiving your spreadsheet. It's how do we help out, the greater community? How do we help out them, their families, just people that are just trying to be reacclimated back into society? And so once again, guys, I call it the 4 Rs. Instead of being reactionary, want to refrain, refocus, and respond. All right.
So there's structural impact you've outlined quite well. Thank you, William. And there's also, of course, the broader impact in terms of what the rising inmate healthcare costs correlate to specific deficits. And I would love to better understand what it would have cost the DOJ were they not to solve the deficits that you were able to highlight for us around both their technological and data challenges specifically. So walk us through some of these data points that we're looking at here specific to those deficits, and then help us better understand what it would have cost your customer here to not solve for them.
Yeah, so I want to add some additional context, right? So I referenced the $1.3 billion budget, and as you see here, between 2009 and 2016, the costs were rising. And as a result, the auditing arm of the government, OIG and GAO, initiated a study within DOJ to really understand why they weren't able to collect the data efficiently, and also to understand why the costs were increasing. And the result of this study was very interesting. And this is something that they weren't aware of, again, because the data wasn't integrated, data silos, legacy systems. The inmate population was aging, hence the rise in costs. So I think, as we all aware, as we age, our health in some cases may worsen. And in the case of the inmates, they were being diagnosed with diabetes, with cancer, a lot of these core morbidities that require more direct help from physicians or through medications. So over time, as again, inmates were getting older, these costs were rising. So that was one of the major findings that we had through this study, in which it actually initiated the work that we came in to do for DOJ. A few other things that, would have cost the DOJ if they didn't solve for these deficits was the inability to detect fraud. So because all of these processes were manual, there were times where physicians would resubmit claims, and you have individuals manually going through these claims. There's the opportunity for human error, and so that's one. Another aspect of it was that they weren't able to launch cost avoidance initiatives, right? So when you're starting to see patterns, you tend to try to respond and fix those issues. They weren't able to do that. So obviously, as a result, the costs just continue to increase. So I kind of pause there and see maybe, William, you had any additional thoughts on, what could have happened if, DOJ never.
Yeah, no, you pretty much summed it up. I think the bigger thing is that we know that throughout all these different things, it still impacts the taxpayer at the end of the day. And that's the thing we definitely have to make sure that we take a look at. And so that's why we're working so hard with our customer to make sure we're able to resolve some of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
So multiple layers of inefficiencies, right? And you were basically contending with the best way to approach this on a systems and processes level, but also you were also thinking about ways to really make an impact for the customer and the greater good, as you mentioned, systemically, and how this affects the broader society that we live in. It really resonated with me when we had this discussion that a lot of what you took on in your mindset and approach echoed what we believe in from a leadership principle perspective here at AWS. And so we've got several that you might be familiar with here at Amazon. And particularly with Chirality, I thought that you took on an approach that we get really excited here at AWS around, specifically thinking big. We do think that when you think small, you get small results, right? So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? But we believe that leaders create and communicate a bold direction that inspires results. And I'm really excited to share with you what some of those results look like on behalf of the DOJ today, thanks to Chirality taking on this mindset and making it actionable, because they're really impressive results. But you definitely took on the approach of thinking differently about how to solve for this problem. And you were looking for more than one way to solve for it based on the specific use cases and pain points of the customer. Does that resonate with you as well? And if so, tell me more about your organizational approach, your mindset, the culture at Chirality that we should keep in mind when you walk us through some of those win results in a few minutes.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'll start it off and then I'll pass it to G-Day and then I have something to say after that. So here at Chirality, we definitely have the mindset, of thinking big, especially as a small business. That's something that we have to take on many different arms. And we have 4 different principles, I think, that align to that specifically. The first one is always strive for the best, never give up. You are responsible to excel, not just equal. Study hard, work hard, and reach your goals. Now, I'll start off with always strive for the best. In anything that we do for our customer, we try to make sure we do the very best at it, regardless of what it is. And what that means to me is just being flexible. One thing that we talk to our team members about is, hey, whether I have to get a cup of coffee or speak to a 4-star general, I need to be willing to do that. Be ready to take it to that next level, whatever it is that they need. The next one is never give up. I'll say specifically, once again, as a small business, that's something that we had to learn. I would say we could use the term issues, but I'm very reluctant to use that. We just think of those as just opportunities. Different challenges, trust me, small business, they come up all the time. But we have to think about, okay, what is the best way to go about doing that? Don't put any limits on yourself. Let's try to figure out how we can make this happen regardless of what it is. And we always just have to have that mindset until we actually are able to ascertain the goals we're looking to do. The next one, you're responsible to excel, not just equal. Within, I'll say, our team members, once again, we want to strive to be the very best. We have to. We have to excel for our customers regardless of what it is. And the way I tell them is, it's on you. It's like, we want to help you become the best version of yourself. That's something we always say. But you have to come to me and tell me, what do you need? We're willing to give training, ready to talk to, but we want to help you do that. But at the end of the day, it's really up to you. So whatever it takes to make that happen, we want to do that. And the last part is, like I said, study hard, work hard, and reach your goals. There's a verse that states that where there's no vision, the people perish. So we need to make sure, okay, what is the goal that you want to ascertain? So we take a time out or take a step back of working with our customers. If you remember the definition that G-Day said, we're basically the mirror image of them. I've worked for companies in the past where it's just all about, hey, here's this product that we sell. Hey, you need to take this. Whereas now our focus is, let's figure out what solution that you all need. How can we be with you all to work in tandem to help resolve whatever issues you all have? And whatever the technical solution is, which in this case, which is a very good one, within Amazon and AWS, that's one that we've seen that works out really well. But with that being said, we have to work in tandem with them to help them reach whatever goal that they have set fit. I don't know anything, Jude?
Yeah, so, thanks for laying that foundation. So based on that, those principles, that philosophy, it was my job to now apply that to this project with DOJ. So in understanding all the facets of the issue, rising costs, lack of ability to quickly respond to congressional inquiries, again, data silos, as you guys continue to hear, lack of data integration. My thought was, okay, what is the best solution that we can provide for the client? And in having that mindset, we thought about, or excuse me, I thought about the grand vision of what it could look like. And with the thought that if we can't get to that and maybe reach a little bit under, it's still going to be a very efficient and scalable solution, which I'll get to further in our discussion. But thinking big and aligning with Amazon, as a partner, definitely worked well for us, given where Amazon AWS was and stood within the industry, and in partnering with them and working with their engineers, they really help us develop, if you will, a think big solution.
All right, real fast before we jump forward, I just digress very quickly. When we're about thinking big, even I'll say us being from the DC area, we see within our football team, to see the Commanders. They start off 1-6, I believe, but now they're thinking big. And guys, I truly believe, and if you all are with me, that they're going to make it to the Super Bowl. If they continue to go down the path that they're going. So if you all are with me, nod your heads.
Any agreement here?
Okay. Okay, my apologies, sir. All right, we have to stay focused. Go ahead, Patricia.
No, let's see how far this goes. Maybe we can discuss this after the session. But what I will say is, it's profound when we see that our partners have an approach that we are steadfast on with respect to our customers, and that you take it on with yours as well. And so in addition to your own set of core leadership principles, your methodology, there were some key mechanisms, but also solutions that you leverage in terms of AWS services. I'd like for you to educate us on how you utilize those services, how they were deployed on behalf of the customer based on the use cases that you provided for us at the onset of this discussion. So just walk us through this a bit. How did you get to those specific results that we're going to touch on momentarily?
Absolutely. So before I get to the portion of explaining how we utilize the AWS as Amazon services, I want to talk about the approach. So the approach that we had was focusing on, if you will, the current state environment, right? Looking at understanding what they already had in place, right? Kind of like the as-is assessment. Looking at their systems, and looking at their data sources, looking at, how their staff count. We also conducted a lot of interviews to really get direct feedback from the individuals that we consider the end user. So kind of going back to, Chirality, we really wanted to get intimate with understanding what the day-to-day processes were, understanding their pain points, so that we were capable of developing a target state that was a sustainable and scalable solution. We also identified use cases, speaking to leadership and trying to understand, okay, what keeps you up at night? What is the type of information and data that you need to make better decisions for the organizations? How do you conduct strategic planning? So not only from a technical perspective, will we also focus on the functional perspective, because, Amazon Redshift, EC2, EBS, those are tools, but those tools are only as good as, some of the processes and the culture that's within the organization. So ultimately, in looking at their infrastructure and taking a step back, in working with government clients, there are a lot of constraints and regulations around how you handle government information. There's PII, specifically in this case, PHI, personal health information because of the inmates' health record. We can't just throw it on the public cloud. So we really had to take a look at their data center and see what workloads, instances, databases, and things of that nature we could upload into some of these Amazon solutions. So let's see. I will start with EC2. So EC2 enabled the client to create as many virtual machines as they wanted. The limitation there was having a physical data center. You only have but so much space, obviously. So helping them leverage EC2 to develop or to have more space with their infrastructures and their computing was definitely a big win for them. And then moving on to Amazon EBS. So there's a requirement to maintain health records for up to 15 years. So as you can imagine, DOJ being around for such a long time, the amount of inmates that were going through the system, et cetera, they incurred extremely large costs for their storage. So in leveraging EBS, block storage, we help them save on their storage costs, where, we'll get to the data point where it was a huge win for them. EBS has strong availability, strong security, compliance, and auditing capabilities. Its performance, fast storage. It supported data at rest and data in transmission. also encryption. So leveraging EBS was a huge win. So then kind of moving on to Redshift, that combined with EC2 was a key solution to help develop the data warehouse for DOJ. The specific solution there was they were able to create a data warehouse of the costs for the core morbidities. So we also helped them develop dashboards to where they could quickly understand their individuals that had diabetes or individuals that had, different forms of cancer.
Were those projected costs, Jide, or were they actual costs based on the state of the patient's healthcare needs?
So it's actually kind of both, because we were able to enable predictive analytics with them, where they took stock of the current data, and then with the analytics engine, it was able to kind of predict costs moving forward. So kind of go back to the data warehouse, we went through the process of de-identifying data because we can't put inmates' information in the cloud. So we were able to develop a mechanism where there's a local key that was allocated to an inmate, and then that information was moved to the database and was able to tie it back to the inmate. And then again, this was enabling them to have quicker access to information and make decisions based on that. Like, for example, if they're noticing an increased cost, or an increased diagnosis of diabetes, they now can project how much insulin they would need to acquire. So, these three AWS services were very key and vital in enabling the solution. And, it came very handy, especially during COVID, where the information was needed real time, because the information was being asked of on a regular basis by CDC. It also helped feed information for strategic and tactical approaches for the security guards. Which prisons has the most cases? What area, was affected, was impacted the most. So with that information, they were now able to deploy their resources much more effectively versus what we saw when we first came in, where none of the data was integrated, none of that information was readily available. So just a few examples of how these AWS services impacted the business real time.
Thanks for outlining that. It's quite a bit of detail. I'm curious to know what the scope of time was from when you launched the project to when you deployed the services, and of course, we're going to get to when you started to measure the results. Can you give us a better sense of that timeline?
So this project was initiated in 2018. So between 2018 and 2021, we were able to fully stand up and implement a solution. So right now, we still support DOJ, but more from a operation and maintenance perspective. And also, looking at ways to continue to implement enhancements, and also, find other areas where efficiencies could be had.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So would love to also better understand how you actually were able to measure success. And when you're thinking about this from a program management standpoint, I'm sure you have some initial performance metrics that you're tracking. Would love to better understand that from you.
Yeah. So as you see here, this was the data point that I was referencing with their storage costs. This was, so kind of going back to what we stand for at Chirality, and I'm sort of similar to Amazon, where there's this customer obsession. Coming in, we understood that this was a major pain point, their storage costs. So this is where we put a lot of our attention and work closely with our Amazon engineers to really understand how we could efficiently and effectively solve this issue with the constraints that we had around not being allowed to upload personal PII data into the cloud. So, from an implementation standpoint, this solution was this data point stood out effectively.
Yeah, I'll say I actually look at it from a different perspective. I like to at least initially understand what the customer views as good. Like what are some of the challenges that they see, and then what does good look like from their perspective? Looking at that, taking that step back and looking at it through that lens. Once again, talk about being chiral, that mirror image of working with them. From there, and actually I want to hold them accountable as well. So once they define initially what does good look like, we start to put different approaches. So once again, whether it is utilizing different process or business transformation approaches or frameworks, whether it is utilizing AWS, the various, technologies that they have, we start to really work with them to understand, okay, are we actually moving the needle? For companies I worked with previously, we would make different decks, different products, all these different things. And did they really care about that? No. That didn't make any change whatsoever.
Yeah.
So for me, at the end of the day, did we actually make some change?
Yes.
Now, working with the government, that can be challenging because, there's different, for lack of a return, various types of red tape that you have to deal with. However, I believe, once again, you establishing that initial understanding of what good looks like with them, and they're able to see progress, not just documents, not just decks, but actually true progress being made. And one of the things that we've done, and it may seem very simplistic, guys, you'd be surprised, we actually have bare men quarterly meetings with them, but just speaking to the customer, just listening to them.
Yeah.
It was so funny for our DOT client, and I know we're talking about DOJ, but our DOT client, we said, hey, can we just talk to you guys, once a month? Just understand what challenges you all are dealing with. Hey, are we actually making change? And they said, wow, nobody else has taken the time to do that. Hey guys, I'm not a rocket scientist by a long shot. I'm not that smart. Trust, ask my kids, they'll gladly tell you. But something that simple, just listening to your customer and actually taking time out to follow up and meet with them, they help define success. But once again, because lessons learned, I asked them up front, what do they deem as what good looks like? And therefore, I hold them accountable, they hold me accountable, and we're working in tandem.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, I remember early in my career doing performance review time, that was the opportunity to receive feedback from your manager. I always was kind of went into that session kind of anxious, thinking, or fearful of, what would be said of my performance. But then I think at one point in time, a manager noticed, my demeanor, and it was this female. She said, feedback is a gift, and that resonated with me. So, I now incorporate that into how I interact with our client at DOJ, constantly looking for that feedback. Hey, how are we doing? What do you guys think about, the work that we're doing? Are we on the right track? So, and kind of going back to the question, I think that's also a way that we measure success, right? Really understanding how we've cultivated the relationship with our client over a period of time, and really using that as a measuring stick for success. Yes, the metrics and the numbers do matter. Specifically here, they were glad they were able to do that for them, but there's also the intangible component of measuring success. When it comes to implementing these large-scale solutions.
Yeah.
Cutting their costs by almost 50% is also a really strong tangible result as well. So it's interesting. It's not where things were left. You also had some additional results on behalf of the customer. I'd love for you to take us through the specifics around how it impacted the inmate population that you had mentioned earlier. Yeah. These specific systemic and technological results actually had a strong impact on their conditions as well. Take us through that. I'd love to hear from both your perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of walk us back to the beginning where the costs were rising exorbitantly, which triggered Congress to send in their auditing arm to study and find out what was going on. Then that triggered us coming in and conducting the study, the work, the as is, the current state, the target state, implementation or solution. Understanding the lack of data integration, understanding the data silos, and understanding just essentially that the business needed to be transformed. So. And I mentioned the timeline. This took about almost 4 years. Taking that phased approach and really being very meticulous in how we addressed all the issues. One of the major pain points, again, was for our clients specifically, was not being able to confidently and effectively respond to a congressional request. So the decision support solution was key to us, and which is what's reflected here in this number, where not only do we help leadership improve their timing and efficiency in responding to congressional requests, we were also able to help the physicians. Now, because their infrastructure was a bit outdated, and there was a lot of legacy systems to manage and to really understand, we learned another pain point from the physicians was that when they are in front of the inmate, for example, they have the physicians utilize maybe an iPad or some of these patient management systems, and also the EHR. They complained of just the sluggishness of the systems and the applications. So, in understanding the legacy system and the constraints of the local data centers and things of that nature, we really focused on leveraging the cloud infrastructure, specifically EC2 and Redshift, to really help speed that up. So in leveraging those solutions, the AWS regions and some of the edge computing capabilities, we were able to incorporate that to improve their decision support. So this number here, was another highlight for our client, where over 50% improvement in being able to respond to requests.
I would say closer to 70%.
Well,
Can we say that?
I didn't
Close
want
to 70%.
I didn't want to,
Nearly 70%.
toot our horn too loud.
No, it's an impressive metric. And I've come to better understand your organization, but I'd love to have you share, William, a little bit more about the composition of your teams and how you build a culture around driving results, but also of inclusion, of wellness, and help us understand how that speaks to results that you deliver on behalf of your customer. And I bring this up specifically because we are integrated human beings and organizations, and results don't just come from the work itself. It comes from building a cultural environment that drives human beings to be motivated, to care about causes greater than themselves, and then certainly to deliver results. But I'd love to hear your perspective on that as CEO, and certainly, Jide, if you have thoughts around how you've been a part of that, right, and how you've been across the team seeing this leadership perspective, I'd love to hear from both of you as well.
Yeah, sure. No, definitely appreciate that. So I'll start off from the company perspective. Before, I was just a number. I just remember, working for companies and just a number. No one really cared about who I was. Even it was to the extent that, and I'll just be transparent, someone was being put above me that was not as qualified as I was. And with that being said, I was like, you know what? Although at that point I had 2 kids, and I said, all right, let me try to go off on my own. Let me see what I can do. And I can tell you, I had as much hair as that gentleman right there had initially. And then you can see what happens when you start your own business. But I said I really want to make a difference. I want to be the person who can decide, okay, where funding goes, how our approach can be to help out our client, to help out our customer, how we can actually give back, because we have a philanthropic arm as well. Because I just truly believe that, if you give, it always comes back, guys. I truly believe in that. And so, just started off, like I said, GD and myself both went to North Carolina A&T together and started pulling, just different people I used to work with in the past. And then started coming together and said, okay, hey, here's the vision. Like I said before, where there's no vision, the people perish. Like, here's where I want us to go. We're a small business now, but we're working with great partners like Amazon. Hopefully we'll be able to continue to grow. But here's where I want us to go forward, long term. And as I stated before, how can I help you become the best version of yourself? So I asked each one of our team members, how can we do that? And honestly, I don't hire anybody unless they're willing to be a true team member. Not just something that someone writes down, but they're really, truly willing to get their hands dirty. As I stated before, hey, I have gotten coffee before. I have taken out the trash because we need to hurry to get something done. But I have been over in Kuwait and Qatar and Jordan and spoken to 4-star generals about the various issues that, that they were having. So just being able to have that mindset and honestly just believing in my people. Like for me, as I'm speaking, I'm talking about it, from a strategic standpoint. G-Day is making sure that we reach these 70%, reduction. I'm not doing that. I will start off, laying out the initial foundation, do the strategy, and bring it together. But with having great people around working with you, I realized, like we say, thinking big, there's nothing that you can't ascertain. And so, that's just something, just my belief. And like I said, working with, Patricia, appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedules to be here. But working with great people and being at a conference such as this, I've learned so much just being here, going to the different sessions. So, just having that continuous mindset to keep learning, keep growing, keep progressing, working with good people, and just instilling that, throughout, I just know great things will happen. So, Gita.
Yeah. And, so I'll take it more so from the team that helped implement the solution. This is a DEI session and definitely want to, plug diversity here. So I'm Nigerian descent. We have one of our DBAs is from Iran. Another one of our consultants is Vietnamese. So, just to name a few, but, I think that really lends itself to how we were able to kind of, establish some common ground where, all come from, immigrant backgrounds to some degree, and kind of have, similar stories in how we were raised and some of the challenges we face. So that helped us kind of build that team camaraderie. And then secondly, us coming from diverse backgrounds, obviously lends itself to also having unique ideas, and unique experiences that we were able to bring to the team, where we were brainstorming and really trying to understand, how can we best serve this client. So, diversity also, played a big part in, what we did on the back end to really develop and deliver this solution, which was obviously, credit to DOJ, was also very welcomed as they also promote a diverse environment.
Really impressive. I have to say, I'm aware that this is your first time speaking at reInvent, and
It is.
I want to acknowledge that you really took us through a robust and comprehensive
I hope so.
success story that speaks to how you approach your customer work with strategic diligence, certainly, but a broader mindset around how to be innovative, how to be inclusive, and how to be impactful. So I want to take this moment to acknowledge you both, certainly, for your leadership and your insights and your expertise. And I will say these gentlemen will be around for the next 5 minutes to answer any questions that you all might have. But I wanted to thank you for your time and engagement here today as well. And feel free to reach out to any of us via email or LinkedIn. We are generally as busy as you are, but happy to connect.
Absolutely.
So thanks again for your time today, and look forward to connecting with you outside. We'll be right outside this room here for any questions that you might have for the next few minutes. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.